Okay, all right. Hello, everybody. Hopefully, everybody's seeing me and hearing me. I can tell from some grins that everybody can. Welcome, everybody, to the next One Firm webinar here at Nexl. Today, I am very, very excited to be talking to our head of customer success, Steve Ongenaet. Steven, how are you? Welcome. Hello, everybody.
All
We'll
good. Thanks,
we'll
Matt.
get into we'll get into the topic very, very quickly. But if anybody's been to the previous two, this webinar series was really about revenue ops, and I had the chance to sit down with the rest of the leadership team. So in number one, I spoke to Phil Thurner all about what is revenue operations. Number two, I got to speak with our SVP of revenue ops, Mark Bilton, and today I get to hang out with Steven, who is live in Mexico City. Steven, while we buy some time and do some chit chat, how are you?
All good, Ben. How are you? Everything's going great here. Nice weather. Very different from Chicago this time of year, I reckon.
Yes, yes, I know that you're jealous of the impending snowclopolis or whatever it is that's going to happen here in Chicago. Yeah, it's not my favorite time of year. I struggle with the transitions. You know, in the middle of winter, it's okay. I already got my seasonal depression is nice and up, but it's that middle time coming from fall to winter that is always really, really tough. But I got a good piece of advice from our very own Emma Roy, which is focus on the holidays. Apparently, that gets you through anything. Nice. So I think we're going to buy a little bit more time. We're going to wait 3 or 4 minutes. This is a huge gathering today. Apparently, everybody really loves the topic or hates the topic of billable hours, but we have a huge turnout today. Over 75 people, I think, signed up for this webinar. So we're going to give everybody a couple minutes to come in. In the meantime, just want to shout out a couple Nexlers that I see. Sarah, Candace. I don't know who else. I think maybe a couple other people in the chat. Emma, of course. Emma, do you want to? Hi, Candace. Thank you. Hearts to Candace as well. Emma is going to be on the call with us, and so some quick background. Well, first of all, Emma, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks.
Well, wonderful. Okay, so Emma's going to be dealing with the Q&A. We are going to be recording this, and there's going to be a Q&A at the end. But if you have questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat, and Emma will actually serve them up to us in the process. Okay, so let's give everybody maybe 2.5 more minutes, but you are in the right place. This is the One Firm webinar all around revenue operations. And today specifically, we're going to talk about how revenue operations really is at the intersection of the future of the billable hour. And Steven's really going to give us some great thoughts about that. And I'm going to pull out some good information on that. Really quickly, Steven, I know that you were actually, while we wait, you were at the Young Partners Retreat in Miami. Any talks about the billable hour at this Young Partners Retreat, or maybe just a little background on what that was and whether or not it touched upon the billable hour in any way?
Yeah, sure. It was a really nice week. Miami's always great, but this time we had the privilege of being there with 40 young partners from all over Latin America that basically participated in a 4-day program around what it means to be a partner, right? So those were people that had just been made partner or are on partner track, and that basically wanted to brush up a bit on what kind of hard and soft skills you need to manage not only yourself, but now the firm as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And there were many topics discussed. There was a lot of talk about innovation. There was a lot of talk about strategy, about business models, and of course, the hourly rate that came up. Absolutely. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but there was definitely that feeling that there's an increasing pressure on that concept of the hourly rate. So yeah, we'll dive into that just in a sec. It was a really good time.
Well, that's fantastic. Miami is my hometown, and you know,
Right.
there are Yes, whenever I was young, of course, I just wanted to leave, and like most times, you just want to leave the place that you're actually from. But I have to admit, sitting in Chicago right now, Miami winters don't sound so bad. So but it's like life; you have to get away for it to actually start to appreciate it. I don't know why human beings are like that, but it's just the case. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen while I reminisce about Miami. So let's go ahead and bring up my screen, and I'll go ahead and hit share. And then present actually, and we'll go ahead and kick off. So let's go back one screen. Okay. Oops. Let's see. I think I should have been sharing from, all right, from one. Here we go. So let's share from here and then hit present, and hopefully this works. No, it doesn't. For some reason, it doesn't want to go back one slide. All good, regardless. I think we're going to go ahead and kick off. Okay, perfect. 1:36. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. You are in the right place. This is the One Firm webinar series, all about revenue operations and law firms. We're going to give a brief presentation, but just to set ourselves, this is the third in our three-part series all about revenue operations. The first was really, what is revenue operations for law firms? What was the concept of revenue operations? And I had the opportunity to speak with Phil Thurner, CEO and founder of Nexl, all about revenue operations and why Nexl created a revenue operations cloud. The second was about accelerating revenue through revenue acceleration programs. Revenue acceleration programs are really discrete use cases that law firms today are using. You might know them as business development programs or referral management or key client programs, but all of this comes under the canopy of a revenue acceleration program and a core use case. And revenue ops really allows for those programs to run very efficiently. And then finally today, I have the pleasure of being joined by Stephen, our head of customer success here at Nexl. And I'm going to ask Stephen very quickly just to introduce himself one more time. But today, Stephen and I are going to be talking about how does the billable hour and revenue operations intersect, and then what are the new business models that that law firms can start to use, and how revenue operations and technology can really enable those. So Stephen, why don't you just go ahead one more time and introduce yourself, quick background before we get really into the substance of this, if you would, please.
Perfect, and thanks for having me, Ben. It's always a pleasure. So my name is Stephen, as Ben mentioned, heading the customer success and service delivery team at Nexl. I'm a Belgian living in Mexico, working for an Australian company, so nice international mix there. And basically, my background has been in legal pretty much my entire career. Worked at big international firms such as Linklaters, also worked at domestic champion firms, so smaller scale operations. And the last couple of years before joining Nexl, I worked as a consultant, mostly in Latin America, as I'm currently based in Mexico. So that's me.
That's fantastic. There is so much more to Stephen, a fascinating man with a fascinating background, and just an absolute pleasure person to be around on a day-to-day basis. But you'll have to get to know him a little bit better, and hopefully you all have the pleasure like I have over the last couple of years, really. Okay, so let's set the agenda here. Again, today we are talking about growing your law firm without the billable hour, and in some ways this is almost the pinnacle of what we're trying to get at and what we believe that revenue operations can actually power. Revenue operations can power new ways to actually grow your law firm without relying on the billable hour. And we're going to go through that today. So here's how this is going to break down. First, we're going to talk a little bit about the state of the billable hour, and Stephen is going to give us some thoughts around that. Next, we're going to talk about the business models that are existing today. What are law firms doing today to actually grow their law firm revenue? Grow their law firm revenue going from, let's say, 1 million to 2 million. without using the billable hour. The third is, how do new revenue models impact the legal professions? What are the ramifications of these new models? What are the new people that are involved? What are the new processes that are involved? What are the new platforms that evolved? And finally, what role does technology and revenue operations play in the evolution of the billable hour? And this is, of course, going to be a conversation about, in part, how Nexl's Revenue Operations Cloud actually is facilitating some of this. And hopefully Stephen can give us some insight into how law firms today are using Nexl to grow without the billable hour. So I'm really excited about that. So let's go into just a little bit of a framing before we get into the conversation. And really, what is the state of law firms? What is the state of legal services in general? Well, this is a very famous graph that probably has made the rounds, and maybe you have seen it. And what it does is it really puts law firms, admittedly AmLaw 200 law firms, really distributes them into different quantiles. Since 2008, and we all know the great financial crisis, I will never forget it because I was 25 years old trying to get a job. And thankfully, I was able to figure out how to do that, but it was definitely tough. Since 2008, there's really been a tale of two law firms, two types of law firms. Some law firms, I think we all know who they are. They are consistently at the top of the AmLaw, and really they are growing much faster than everybody else. One type of law firm has really accelerated and actually grown beyond their 2008. The others have not done so well. There are many, many law firms today who have not even reached back or come back to their 2008 levels. In fact, they are on a downward slope. So we really see this tale of two law firms. And then next, so we've asked ourselves, why is that the case? Why are some law firms doing incredibly well? And why are other law firms not even getting back to their 2008 levels, despite it almost being 20 years since the 2008 crisis, as hard as it can, as hard as that, sorry, 15 years, 15 years, give or take, 12 years, give or take, almost getting up to 20 years in a couple of years since 2008. Another way to look at this is financial index, and this is really profitability. This is from Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters pooling financial data from the platforms, the Thomson Reuters platforms that actually track this. And today, law firms, many law firms are actually in a fairly sad state whenever it comes to their financial performance. Of course, there are very few who are doing exceptionally well, but vast majority, what we have seen since the financial crisis in 2008 is flat growth, and in some sense, declining growth since that point in time. Of course, law firms have not done anything, and we're gonna answer the question why. But in this period of time, law firms have not just sat on their hands. They've invested in a variety of different programs, client services, CRMs, business development training. They have done things to try to change that trajectory. What we're going to argue is that some law firms have done that better than other law firms, and because of that, we have really seen the difference. And the truth is when we took a look and we answered the question, why are some law firms doing so well and others are not, it comes down to alignment. What today we see is basically some law firms completely aligned toward revenue, and we can see that sort of upward trend of their revenue, and by function of that, in some sense, increased profitability, while there's many law firms who, although they've invested in different programs, marketing, business development, lawyers, client services, all the rest of these teams, those teams are still misaligned and really going in separate ways. And so they're not seeing a positive ROI. Misalignment and sideload teams within law firms are a key problem that is really leading to this tale of two firms, some firms doing incredibly well that are aligned and others being very misaligned despite heavy investment. So that's the framing. And today we think that revenue operations as a model, as a platform, can really break down the silos and align firms on where to actually start to grow in a significant way. So that's the background. That's the framing that we come into this. And today, I think we want to talk with Stephen a little bit about the billable hour. But before we get into that, Stephen, any reflections? You get the opportunity to speak with clients all day long, and maybe this idea around misalignment, this idea around silo teams. Any initial thoughts on that?
Phrase of the year. Now, I was struck by that slide where you see the sort of the whiplash effect in terms of profitability, right? The Thomson Reuters slide, which, I mean, it was pretty much a flat situation, but now you can see that in these special times, we saw initially a huge uptick in profitability when sort of law firms braced themselves for the effects of the pandemic. And now with inflation soaring and with sort of all of these things going on, looming recession, etc., you can see that there's definitely a lot of movement in the market. So I think that's just a very interesting time to work in this context and to see what law firms are actually doing to sort of counter all of these pressures they're experiencing in the market. So that's definitely a very interesting background to have this discussion. And in terms of alignment, I think every single conference we go to and we are invited to sort of share our thoughts on, the big thing that always comes back is that misalignment, right? That lack of connectivity between marketing, business development, or business services and the lawyers, or between the different practice groups within a single law firm. That sort of the big challenge of collaboration. It's a word that's easily said, but as it's very difficult to actually realize. And so I think that there's consensus around, I think, the upside of having collaboration, around having alignment. The big question is how to get there, right? What do we need to put in place to make sure that we can achieve that? So, even on the retreat I was last week in Miami, there was lots of echoes on that very debate. So I think it's a very timely conversation to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're not going to discuss how to actually align. Basically, the answer is revenue operations, a operational mindset that is all about aligning. And by the way, Nexl has invented and created a platform that helps with that misalignment, really bringing everybody into one platform. Today, we're going to go all the way and talk about the billable hour and how revenue operations can really help law firms grow without the actual billable hour. So this is a very natural evolution of this webinar series. The first was about what is revenue operations. The second was around the revenue acceleration programs that are being used today by law firms. And I think we want to go the last step all the way out, which is growing without the billable hour. So why don't we start with describing what is the state of the billable hour? What is going on in the world whenever it comes to the billable hour? Apparently it's been dead or not dead for the last 35 years or something like this.
Well, the debate is very much alive and kicking, right? That's for sure. I mean, the debate on the future of the billable hours is in great shape. There's always a great interest in that particular topic. There's lots of people out there talking about it. The status of the hourly rate itself probably is increasingly under pressure, I would say. I was recently part of a publication where I interviewed a couple of people from the market on that exact same topic, and they plotted all of the opinions of the authors in that publication on sort of a slider as to, is it going to stay or is it going to go away? There's definitely a consensus about the fact that it's not going to go away anytime soon, and I think it is increasingly under pressure because the current context where we operate in, that I just described, I think increasingly allows us to see sort of the flaws of a business model that is based on basically input, right? On time as sort of the basic unit for production, if you wish, for legal services. I think everybody on this call, is probably very much aware of sort of the problem of the hourly rate is that it puts the efficiency risk entirely on the client side, right? I think that's in essence what sort of the case against the hourly rate is. And then obviously it goes against the nature of, the autonomous lawyer that doesn't want to be pressured into that sort of rat race of doing constantly more and sacrificing more of their lives to, increase billings. And, any lawyer will agree that just filling in timesheets is about the most horrendous thing that can happen to them, and that's obviously sort of a negative aspect as well that lawyers have to deal with on a daily basis. And I think when you think about it, the whole logic also creates, almost perversive effects sometimes, especially in these high pressured competitive markets where people need to, do more with less and constantly go after increasingly difficult targets in terms of billable hours. I think that can definitely lead to sort of sometimes even unethical behavior, right? Or at least indirectly to the inflation of the cost of legal services. I don't know if you heard that story at some point, but there's this guy, I don't know if it's true or not, but I read it and I thought it was really funny, that in the 80s, there was this New York lawyer that actually broke the world record of logging the number of hours per day. He was actually able to do 27 billable hours in one day because he spent time on a flight, like a westbound flight, that allowed him to actually have more hours in the day. And so he billed 27 hours in one day. You can see how that logic sort of creates these,
totally.
border cases that probably are not in the interests of clients. And obviously the another big topic is that the whole idea of clients being in control of the cost of their legal services is just very difficult to do if you have to depend on the time as the basic unit of measurement. And I don't know, do you know where the hourly rate is coming from, Ben? I wanted to ask you, do you know when it started, who invented it?
Yes, of course. Oh, are you asking me like in a rhetorical way? Yes, I do. So, oh my God, you just put me on but basically it was either Latham and Watkins or Sherman and Sterling or some fundamental inner circle New York law firm basically came up with the idea of rate. And I think it was, I think it's been around for basically something like 150 years now. So, arguably like a fine wine, maybe it doesn't, but even all wine turns sour eventually. But yes, that's exactly the story. One New York law firm invented it, 150 law firms.
I'll tell you,
it's basically.
I looked it up before this conversation.
Okay,
so sorry to put you on the spot.
So no.
I know. It's this guy. He used to be like the managing partner of, I think, the firm that is now Wilmer Hale. But so you're right, in that kind of league.
Okay.
And interestingly, they have a story on the website that I was able to read before joining today. The guy sort of invented or came up with that concept basically because he thought that clients had the right sort of to know exactly what happened. They came out of a period where sort of value-based billing was the usual way of charging for legal services. And he said, well, we should have like more justifiable means to tell our clients what we've done with our time. And that's going to create more transparency, and it's just going to be a good thing. So interestingly, that whole concept of the billable hour actually was invented to give clients more certainty, more sort of arguments as to why the cost was what it was. And today we can see sort of how that morphed into something very different that actually starts to eat away at that original concept. And I think that's super interesting. What happened is once they started sort of thinking about the hourly rate as the metric for charging the fees for charging their services, it became a very different thing, and it became sort of the foundation of law firm management as a broader thing.
Exactly.
You know?
Right. Exactly.
I think careers are made or broken based on how many billable hours people can put in, and so. And anyway, it's not going to go away anytime soon. The debate is alive and well. That's for sure.
Yes. Definitely. So my big takeaway, and I think maybe the takeaway, to put it in the chat if you agree here, my big takeaway on this is, first, the billable hour is alive and well. However, in some ways, it's gotten very far from its original stated purpose, which is the original stated purpose was just a client-facing itemized bill. And instead, over the course of the last 150 years, it has basically turned into the main metric on which law firms and their profitability, and then even by virtue their philosophy, is effectively run. So in some ways, be careful the ideas that you put into the world. They might turn into have unintended consequences, basically. So that was my takeaway. Let me know in the chat if you agree with that, or basically, what do you think is the state of the billable hour? Put it in the chat, and we'd love to sort of like read it out, and maybe Emma can shout it out. Does your firm use the billable hour? Have you thought about alternative service fees? Put it in the chat and let us know. Okay, so that gets us to the next topic that we want to get at, which is we understand the state of the billable hour, and we can just appreciate that it is there. But the reality is that compared to, let's say, 40 years ago, there is a host of ideas, and quite frankly, new alternative ways and new alternative business models that have kind of exploded over the last 30, 20, 10, 15 years, really a Cambrian explosion. We'll argue that that's because of technology in part. Technology always creates new cultures in part. But you want to talk a little bit about the business models that exist outside the billable hour, maybe in the theoretical as well in the actual realness of the world in the actual field?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think what you mentioned in the beginning of the chat was spot on. I think in the wake of the financial, like the Great Recession in 2008, I was at Linklaters at that time, and I was doing, proposal after proposal and pitch after pitch. So I really had to, I was sort of confronted with that in a very real way. And I think at the time, customers or clients, they were mainly concerned around the financial pressure. It was much more that idea that they had to rationalize their external legal costs. So you had procurement all of a sudden appearing. You had these competitive bidding procedures law firms had to participate in, and you had to the alternative fee arrangements, right? And I think at that time it became pretty normal for law firms to price their services with capped fees or fixed fees or on a retainer, or they would come up with blended rates, all of these sort of exotic arrangements that basically try to pretend, and I'm using that word carefully, to do things differently, right? I think that whole idea around shifting the efficiency risk back to the provider rather than the consumer, of course, made sense, right? And you saw that within law firms, you had teams that tried to chop up and slice and dice big projects into smaller bits and then price those pieces separately. And I think that was a good step forward. But the problem was, of course, that the underlying operational model did not change, right? Towards the exterior, you had that sense that things were being done differently. But as long as law firms continue to use the hourly rate as their sort of internal metric for success, basically, I think that the real dynamic didn't change. As long as these alternative fee arrangements were time-based predominantly, I think in essence it didn't really change all that much. I think the alternative really is what we call value-based pricing, right? I think it's a concept that is widely understood, but that is still very hard to put in practice. And when you talk about value-based arrangements, then you really talk about charging legal fees, not so much based on what goes into the machine, like the input into the legal matters, but on the outcomes, right? What do clients really value? What do you actually, where do you change the needle for your clients? And that's a very different ball game, because all of a sudden, if you're able to detach the way you operate from that core concept of the hourly rate, I think you get into really new territory. You know, I like that quote of who's a Warren Buffett, that says like, price is what you pay and value is what you get. You know, I think that's such an interesting way to put it. And I think lots of firms that experimented with alternate fee arrangements, they really thought that from a pricing perspective, like, you know, we have to create different ways to price our services. But I think the bigger debate is, how do we actually organize our firm, and how do we create a revenue operations model that sort of goes beyond that input-driven way of producing legal services. So I think that's a big difference. So if you really want to go into that value-based way of operating, I think that's where you're going to change the needle, and that's where we see increasingly interesting experiments being done in law firms, where you go into subscription-based business models, or really contingency fees or success fees, where it's all about what you can actually do for the client, what they value in your services, rather than what you have to do in order to get it out, right?
Yeah, 100%. So, whenever I think of this, and maybe we can just give a couple concrete examples of what comes underneath value-based, a value-based model versus, which is an output-based model, versus an input-based model, which is an hourly model. But to me, the real big difference always is the difference between what does your client actually value, and understanding really what your client actually truly values, versus simply doing what you functionally know how to do or operationally know how to do and deliver through that. And I think that, quite frankly, this is difficult, because you have set up basically a law firm in a way to deliver an input hours basically into its system to solve a discrete problem. And while that legal problem might be something that a client specifically wants, it's very narrow. It doesn't really consider value in terms of what all does a client actually want, from the perspective of both handling a legal problem, but also proactive legal problems. Maybe a place whereby law firms or sort of the client can educate itself. It's a much different mindset and much different philosophy. Is that like a good way to think about kind of the difference between input billable versus output kind of value-based business models, effectively?
Absolutely. And I think to pick up on that, value means different things to different people, right? So I think the whole premise of value-based legal services is that you actually understand what your clients value, and that's not going to be the same thing for every client. So I think it comes with that idea that actually, as a business, as a firm, you need to be much more focused on what clients actually want, what they value. So you move away from sort of a product-focused way of operating, where it's all about legal excellence and we need to have the best lawyers and the best legal advice. You move away towards a real client-centric model, where you're going to say, okay, before we do anything, let's ask what the client actually wants. And I continue to be surprised how bad law firms are at listening to their clients. It's kind of a cliche, but I think it's so true. And with Nexl, for instance, we do many projects where we set up sort of client listening programs or client feedback programs, where you try to understand what's actually valued, what's needed, and that again is going to be different things for different people. Some customers, they tend to lean towards sort of a more a service delivery model based on efficiency, on speed, reactivity, and some companies, they have very solid in-house teams, and they'll just value the really high-end stuff and sort of the brainy stuff that external firms can bring to the table. And those are very different things. In a way, I think the whole debate around technology and sort of digital transformation is also changing very much what law firms value, right, or what they need. We tend to think about the impact of technology on law firms, and we continue to focus on what law firms need to change in terms of their tech stack and things like that. But really, they should be thinking about how all of that, how all of these processes that are also playing out on the client side, what that means for how their service delivery models should change. So it's again, interesting times.
Totally. So let's get concrete for a second before we go to the next question. Whenever it comes to actually business models that exist outside of the billable hour, can you just give us maybe 2 or 3 examples or 2 or 3 categories? You already spoke about one, which is pretty well understood, which is alternative fee arrangements, flat fee, sort of project-based arrangements. Any others that you have kind of seen in your travels that people should know about?
Well, I think, and again, I mentioned it before, I think that subscription-based services, that's really where I put my money in terms of the model that's going to do very well going forward, because it allows at the same time for that cost certainty aspect. It allows for continuity. It allows for that continued relationship of trust, because I think trust can, in value-based business models will be even more important than before.
Right.
But I think that idea of it's not really a retainer, but sort of allowing customers to access resources, not just people, right, and their time, but we live in a digital world. There's templates, there's automated contracts. There's so much know-how out there that law firms can now actually scale and make available sort of on a subscription-based arrangement that I think will do very well going forward. It depends also on the regulatory context. I mean, not every country is the same in that respect, and where there is a bit more flexibility, I think contingency fees and border success fees will continue to be an attractive option as well. I've seen really interesting examples where sort of law firms can go out there and sort of replicate certain projects they've done for customers and do it purely on a contingency basis. So if the client gets value, whether that's less risk, more money, or less losses, it doesn't really matter. But if there's an upside for them, then the law firm gets to share. I think those are probably the most prevalent value-based models out there.
Yeah, totally. I'm going to add 2 more before we go to the next question that I've only heard of recently. So the next one is consulting, of course, and a business consulting, operational consulting kind of model. Of course, that's fees, but that can come in lots of different ways. But that's a new service line, let's call it. And then the last is kind of renting software from law firms. I've just heard about this, where basically the law firm will create a tech stack for an in-house department, and the in-house department will rent access, let's say, or subscribe, basically access to software, and the software will be best of class, effectively, for specific types of law firms. Specific type of legal department. So lots to do there, and lots of new revenue lines and business models that can really sort of be built out above and beyond the loved, hated billable hour. So 2 interesting parts. So let's go to the next question, which is, the question is really, how do new revenue models impact the legal profession? And we can go very, very wide here, but I know that you have some thoughts in terms of growth, in terms of demand, in terms of expanding, of course, and growing the legal industry per se. How do you think revenue models are going to impact ultimately? Some thoughts in terms of the legal profession, and what are you seeing sort of like today?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think what you see is definitely a couple of technologies that try to make that time-based model more efficient, more streamlined. So, you can see AI-driven technologies around how to improve your time tracking There's increasingly providers on the market that help law firms with legal project management, with pricing. But again, that's kind of all making the traditional time-based model more efficient. I think what's the really interesting part is what we were just talking about, right?
Right.
How can
Yes.
law firms anticipate client needs by just being more in tune with they're going through, how they're transforming their own business, and then we're talking about obviously totally different legal needs, everything. Whether it's from financial sector that everything is going on with crypto, it's a very different set of requirements that customers will have from traditional banks. That used to obviously be a key client for many law firms out there. But what you see is in the legal teams themselves within the company, the in-house teams, they've grown so much over the years, and you know more about that than I, but that whole concept of legal operations within legal teams in companies is obviously also changing the dynamic, right? So the examples you gave as to new kind of revenue lines is spot on. How can law firms actually position themselves as providers to legal ops teams in-house legal teams? I think that's an entirely new kind of category of services that they can come up with that obviously require different skills, different processes, different people that will really change the way law firms look like and the way they operate. And you can see that already happening. Like, when you talk about the billable hour, I think you should always talk about the traditional sort of pyramid structure of law firms as well. You can see that's eroding as well with all of these changes that we're seeing. Sort of that typical top-down approach with the relationship partner on top of the pyramid, and then sort of all of the workers below doing the legwork. I think that's a model that's going to get outdated pretty quickly as well. So anyway, just a couple of thoughts there.
Yeah, completely. And that it sort of reminds me, and one of our favorite sayings here is, the future in law firms belong to the revenue operators, right? These are people who really sort of holistically see the value that law firms can really capture out there, and do not simply look at the world in terms of, well, my practice area, my billable hours, and how does that sort of end up in the bottom line, right? The world really belongs to these revenue operators if you can understand how to deliver value, including but not to the exclusion of just the billable hour. And so if you are out there, if you are inspired by this vision, we want you to start calling yourself a revenue operator. Wear that badge proudly, and know that we're here to support you. So let's go to the before I do, Emma, I don't know if there's any questions. Just wanted to check in very quickly, see if there's anything. We're going to wrap up pretty soon with the last question here, which is all about how does technology really play with this evolution of the billable hour, or maybe another way of saying this, that the emergence of value-based value services and value products, let's say. Emma, anything that we should check in really quick?
Doesn't look like it. It looks like you guys are answering all of everybody's questions before they even have a chance to drop them in the chat, but I will keep you updated as we go.
Awesome. Okay, so we are going to come to the last question here for Stephen. Stephen, so what is the role of technology, revenue operations, let's say, but let's focus on technology. How is that playing in the evolution of the billable hour specifically? Is it platforming? Is it allowing? What are you seeing basically here with the role of these role of technology and
Sure.
the play of billable hour? Yeah.
Well, to the extent that we haven't covered it in our conversation so far, I think we can sort of get back to that original idea around collaboration, right? And how that is a strategic necessity for law firms to get right. And when we talk collaboration and alignment, we refer to how that plays out within the law firm itself. But I think one of the big benefits of technology coming in is really allowing also for a very different collaboration between the client and the law firms themselves, right? I think you increasingly see sort of a leveling playing field, if you wish, where the lawyers and the law firms are no longer sort of the the only experts out there, right? And that comes with a whole set of cultural changes that go with it. But just being able to go into that client relationship with a growth mindset, but also with sort of that idea around, look, this is going to be a two-way street. This is going to be a collaborative effort. Again, that requires knowing your clients, understanding what they value, how they operate. There's a lot of work for law firms to be done there. I'll just with a quick example, because it's also, it's not a risk-free thing, that whole value-based stuff. I mean, I was in a situation at some point in a firm that typically used the billable hour, but then for a specific tax litigation project, they worked on the basis of a success fee, and it was this huge litigation with like an enormous amount of money on the line, and they end up winning the case, and the success fee on that individual matter alone was more than the total combined revenues of the entire office for 1 year. And so that brought then an entire new set of issues, like around, so how does our compensation model really works with these value-based projects? How do we distribute that? Who's entitled to what? And how does that, what does it mean in terms of collaboration between the tax team and the other practice areas in that firm? That team ended up leaving sort of the firm because they just, there was so much money all of a sudden that became available, that raised a whole new set of questions. I know it's sort of getting away a bit from the tech side of that story, but just to point out that you have to be aware of the impact that these new schemes and arrangements can have on your firm. And I think that's something important to bear in mind. And in terms of the impact of tech, I think try to invest in tools that allow you to stay closer to your clients, understand what they want, where they're heading, to stay on top of relationships, so that you can have that level of connectivity, proximity that clients today want and need from their service providers. And technology really can play, a great role in achieving just that.
Yeah. So I think we're going to wrap up. I want to first thank Stephen, but very quickly, just to summarize and get some final comments from Stephen, if I could share my screen really quickly, just to see what we went over. So today we really spoke about, and let's see if I can get to the actual last slide. Okay, so today we spoke about the state of the billable hour. Stephen, basically, I think we summarized that the billable hour is alive and well, still a major topic of discussion for most law firms today. But what is obviously present is the fact that there are various new billable hours, new types of schemes and business models available to law firms today to really start to capture and, dare I say, actually generate new types of value. Next, we came into the business models that exist, and I think you gave us a couple really good examples: alternative fee arrangements, performance. We talked a little bit about subscriptions and reoccurring revenue. We even talked about consulting. So lots of this across the board. And then finally, the promise of how technology can really play a role in really the evolution of law firms. Anything that you wanted to leave off, or any final remarks as you sort of reflect on the agenda today? Oh, are you on mute? Yeah.
Let's keep the debate, alive and well as it is. I think it's interesting. It's difficult for lawyers to break out of that mental mold of the billable hour. They've grown up in that model. It's difficult to sort of move away from it. But I would encourage people to experiment, to talk with their clients about it. It's people tend to sort of think about that in their little bubble, but just go out there and touch base with your clients and see what they think, what they prefer, what they might suggest. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that conversation alone.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up here today, but if you are a revenue operator, like we say, we do believe that the future belongs to revenue operators. The billable hour might not be going away, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be the only thing that's available in law firms. Pretty soon, revenue operators are going to bring new types of business models to law firms, and we believe that the future is there. If you want to learn more about revenue operations for law firms, head over to nexl.cloud, go to the white paper, and of course, head to nexl.cloud if you'd like to take a look at Nexl's revenue operations cloud platform, really designed to help law firms grow in a new way, including in these new business models. So really, really exciting stuff. And we'll end with that. Emma, any questions that we should be getting to?
I think you guys, you 10 out of 10. You answered everybody before they even had a chance to drop it in the chat. But as always, people are more than welcome to email us questions. Keep the conversation going long after.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to everybody. And of course, thank you to Stephen. This was part 3 in our One Firm webinar series all around revenue operations. We will be back in the new year. We're going to take a break for December, but we will be back with a webinar on data science and law firm revenue and how data science can actually power law firm revenue. Super cool topic we're going to be doing with Wilson Allen. Take care on that, and please join us for that as well. Thank you to everybody joining us, and thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Senor Stephen, and we will see you later. Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.